Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest from the UK. His name is Kit Klarenberg, and he just published a fascinating article, April 21st, 2022, and you can see it on the screen if you're listening to this on YouTube. Title of that article is Human Lab Rats, CIA Files Confirm Guantanamo Bay Torture Programs, MKUltra Roots. Fascinating article. Highly recommend people check that out. I'll put all his information in the show notes so you can click through. Kit Klarenberg is an investigative journalist exploring the role of intelligence services in shaping politics and perceptions. His work has previously appeared in The Cradle, Declassified UK, and Grey Zone, and you can follow him on Twitter at his full name. So it's Kit, Kit Klarenberg. And I'll put some of the links to his earlier articles in the Grey Zone. This one is on from Mint Press News, and he's also written for Covert Action Magazine, a couple articles, and I had just read one of the articles from one of the editors into my podcast, a great article about the murder of MLK, or Martin Luther King, and some of his other titles of his journalistic articles, which you'll see the links to, are one is Leaked Files Expose Syria PsyOps Veteran AstroTurfing Bread Tube Star to Counter COVID Restriction Critics. And another one is the Uyghur podcast brought to you by a CIA torture propagandist. But again, the title of this fascinating article is, which we're going to talk about today, Human Lab Rats, CIA Files Confirm Guantanamo Bay Torture Programs, MKUltra Roots. So Kit Klarenberg, welcome to the show. Thanks for agreeing to the interview.
Hi.
For people who may not have heard your name or know your background, can you kind of talk about your other writings and what brought you to write this article about the torture programs MKUltra Roots?
Oh, sure. I mean, more generally, I look at, the role of, as you said, intelligence services in shaping politics and perceptions. A lot of this entails, covering covert propaganda campaigns, psychological manipulation and behavior modification. And of course, the MKUltra is somewhat, the daddy of them all. In terms of this was a wide-ranging CIA program which lasted decades, probably never ended really, actually, and was specifically concerned with tearing human minds apart and putting it together in shapes of the CIA's own choosing, and it has enormous relevance today in all manner of fields. The agency was granted an extraordinarily rich insight into how to break humans down mentally and physically, and the idea that the key key takeouts from this research were no doubt weaponized and exploited in all manner of ways, most of which we would have no idea about. I mean, I think the CIA torture program in general is very, very interesting as well, because this war, it was global in nature, but of course, Britain was a key kind of conspirator within this, and I have written fairly extensively about Britain's role in this, and just as in the US, everyone involved got away with it, even though we have literal, first-hand evidence of there's an MI6 operative called Mark Allen, where he openly, it was discovered in all places in the bombed-out headquarters of Colonel Gaddafi's security services. It was this fax directly sent by Mark Allen talking about the torture of a particular detainee. So, even though that kind of bombshell, incontrovertible evidence, no one's ever been prosecuted, and in fact, often some of the officers involved at the highest levels have gone on to work have gone to work in the private sector and have employed the techniques they honed while working for MI6 for for corporate clients. One is this individual called Richard Barrett, who was running the MI6 counter-terror unit at the time that 9/11 happened, and did so for a further 3 years. And he now runs a communications firm called Global Strategy Network, which is heavily involved in psychological operations abroad. And yes, it would be entirely unsurprising if he was heavily implicated in this. So I think as an example of the total impunity with which the intelligence services operate, you can't really get a much better example than MKUltra or the CIA's global torture program. And yeah, I have some more material coming out on this soon.
Right. No, it is fascinating. Even here in the States, we don't hear much about this. You mentioned a guy, Jeffrey K., who I follow on Twitter, who wrote about Guantanamo, but we all know that these black sites existed, but you talk about specific individuals who were brought into those sites. Can you talk about this guy, Bellucci, and what happened to him?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that so essentially, he was arrested in April 2003, and he's the nephew of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who's the kind of mastermind of 9/11, and in common with many of the high profile post 9/11 Al-Qaeda arrests, there was a lot of bombastic claims made by Bush administration officials as to his significance within the group, and how he was tied to all of these different terrorist attacks, etc. And it doesn't seem that any of this is true. I mean, at most, he seems to have sent some money to the 9/11 hijackers. The extent at which he acted as a kind of a courier and cutout for a number of wealthy Middle Eastern businessmen, and he would provide funding and support to Muslims living in the Western world frequently in order to supplement his income. I mean, does that mean that he knew anything about 9/11? No, and indeed my article is based on this, in part on this declassified CIA Inspector General review of his treatment, and it rules that that to the extent that he told his interrogators anything, it was in order to get the torture to stop, and he fabricated what he told them. And I think that this is one of the key things that people often, that people even kind of critical sources miss in a lot of their discussion of the CIA torture program, is that it was a failure in the sense it didn't get any usable intelligence, but from the perspective of being able to concoct a conspiracy narrative around 9/11 in order to justify the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and others were of course planned, and indeed to provide a rationale for intensive surveillance measures at home and the creation of an effective police state on American soil. This was a massive success. So if you look at, say, Abu Zubaydah, he was one of the first captured. I think it was in 2002, and again, he was portrayed as this international terrorist mastermind who was central to every known Al-Qaeda plot and had served as a key trainer and for Al-Qaeda operatives, and he was built up to be this, as I say, this kind of this international terrorist mastermind. In reality, he seems to have been a mentally ill individual who was effectively charged with running a Taliban like running a Taliban safe house, and ensuring it was clean and tidy when people stayed there. And he's been tortured so badly that he can't see out of one eye. He can't remember his own father's name. Like, he hears constant noise. Like, they employed all sorts of measures in order to get him to talk, which included putting him in a kind of a cramped coffin full of cockroaches for like 2 weeks. It's just extraordinary, and it just goes back to there's a recurrent tendency, within, particularly in the mainstream media, to dismiss the notion that conspiracies happen, or dismiss a kind of a critical reading of a particular event as being a kind of conspiracy theory and thus false. I mean, this was in itself very clearly a criminal conspiracy in which a large number of people all agreed to commit absolutely heinous crimes they continued torturing these people despite the fact that they knew that all of the information they were being given was false. And then, in turn, they lied to lawmakers and the public and the military, and government officials about the program's efficacy. And yes, no one was ever prosecuted or lost their job. So I think that given that this is, the Senate, the full Senate report on this is still classified today. All we have is at times heavily redacted summary, which is still contains some absolutely extraordinary information. I think then this kind of ties in with the article you mentioned that I wrote for Covert Action magazine on the Uyghur podcast. And I think that this is another thing that's been frequently missed, is that essentially at the start of 2011, the agency, well, because they knew that what they were doing was being scrutinized, that essentially they went on this massive kind of public relations crash course of approaching journalists and it seems filmmakers as well, and seeding the idea that the torture program was absolutely fundamental to the capture of Osama bin Laden, and the raid in Pakistan on his reported compound, that was very much that was almost part of the PR effort. They spent all of these months talking about how we can now catch him because we tortured all of these people, and then after the raid they engaged the media directly in order to promote the program. And so it's quite striking then that that obviously the next year that awful film Zero Dark 30 is released, which is effectively a 90-minute CIA propaganda infomercial, in which starts off with none other than Baluchi, who I wrote. Being tortured. That scene is based on his torture, and the CIA had an enormous influence on the making of that film. Its relationship with the filmmakers was considered quite so intimate that it was actually investigated by the CIA Inspector General because they felt it was very inappropriate. So I mean, it's quite a rabbit hole. And yes, the fact that no one has ever been held accountable for this, I think you should always bear in mind if you find it hard to believe that someone would be so capable of doing of doing something so evil, in considering whether a particular event, say, or I don't know, like an alleged terrorist attack, someone would be someone would be suitably evil to kind of carry that out. I mean, bear in mind these people operate in a culture of total impunity where there are no consequences to their actions whatsoever. And I mean, I thought that the article was important to write, not only because of the report's release, but at last, 14 years after it was written, essentially the link between MKUltra and the CIA torture program is it's never been, to my mind at least, kind of effectively effectively codified. Like I mean, some people have drawn some parallels, but in terms of the very, very, very clear manner in which the torture program served as an effective continuation of MKUltra, and indeed the same kind of techniques, the same kind of psychological and physical torture was deployed again. And I think it's interesting. What's also interesting is, yes, like the torture program, MKUltra is regarded as a failure today, and I think that's kind of it. That's the narrative the CIA is very happy with, and so it's kind of, I think that again, bear in mind that these people like to perpetuate the narrative of ineptitude. Like, everything's just a bit, like we were actually we're a bit useless, and it's all rather funny, like the tales of the CIA rigging a cat with a recording device, and then the cat at enormous expense, and then it walks out into middle of the road and gets run down by a truck. And it's just like, but then actually, you know, the quite clearly, and internal CIA reviews said that this was extremely useful, and all of the all of the material they got out of it was extremely valuable, and it was worthwhile conducting this. And when to the extent it was formally shut down in the US, it was because they were worried about getting what would happen if they got caught. I mean, in the event they did kind of get caught, and they got away again. They got away with all of it. But
so the culture of impunity is not something that just happened during the Bush administration or the war on terror.
Oh no, and it's just, and I think that again, people are all too willing to attribute particular policies to a particular administration, and I think that actually, the CIA isn't up for election every 4 years. So
Right.
and again, most of what they do is kept secret from lawmakers themselves. So I think that I was thinking of a good example of this. That I mean, the CIA themselves have acknowledged that when during the Cold War, when they were training fascist police forces in Latin America or Asia, and teaching them torture techniques and all sorts of other kind of horrific things, they admitted the reason that we did this and we focused on what do you call them, the state agencies in terms of recruitment, in terms of infiltration, and in terms of having kind of assets on the ground, is that the police force remains even when a government doesn't. And so this is to ensure that they had a steady pipeline of people who could be relied upon to target the left, target progressive democratic groups, and take out troublesome figures, because then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who's in power, which political party or leader is in power. The same things keep getting done.
Right, and one of the interesting elements of a fascinating article, interesting elements, is you show that the torture that's implemented in this terror or black sites is similar to you and Cameron's approaches. He's kind of a notorious figure in the MKUltra.
Oh, yeah.
And you talk about the similarities, and you show this picture. If people are watching on YouTube, you can see these guys are in massive sensory deprivation.
Yeah, well, it's just, I mean, I think it's what's very interesting is that what I always found curious was that, I even saw this connection myself many years ago when I was when I learned about MKUltra the first time. I saw photos and videos and diagrams of some of you and Cameron's test subjects, or people who are being subject to sensory deprivation. And then actually, yes, that whenever you look at any and all photos online of the CIA prisoners during the war on terror, they're quite clearly being subject to sensory deprivation techniques. And I think that no one at the time made the connection, even though there was evidence of this in plain sight. I mean, that there was I think it was Jose Padilla, like when he was taken to the dentist, he had these huge earmuffs on, he was shackled, he had like a visor so he couldn't see. And it's just like, I mean, I think that the CIA put the narrative around at the time that it's because they're really dangerous. But like, if someone's really dangerous, why would you not allow them to hear? Like, I don't, and they're in, kind of permanent custody. It's, and I think that essentially, Ewan Cameron has cropped up in a few other investigations of mine. But he was a kind of, I think he was a Scottish-born psychiatrist who then moved to Canada and then moved to the US, and he was very much on the CIA's radar from the 1940s, not least because he played a role in the reconstruction of West Germany, and he had this notion that was very prevalent at the time, that the Germans were uniquely dangerous and aggressive and prone to dictatorship, And as a result, he thought that there should be, massive social re-engineering of the entire German people, to the extent of, not allowing certain Germans to have children. And it's, he patented the technique called psychic driving, where essentially the narrative is that he was trying to recreate programmable humans, potentially like a Manchurian candidate type, a kind of remote controlled assassin. I mean, this isn't really true. In reality, what his techniques, which involve giving people huge doses of psychoactive drugs and electric shocks while they listen to hours of kind of recorded audio messages over and over, in order, he was effectively rendering them to a total blank slate. There is a documentary made by Adam Curtis in the mid-90s called "You've Used Me as a Fish Long Enough," which is about the program. And I disagree with his overall thesis that, because, I mean, funnily enough, his conclusion is that, well, psychic driving proves that MKUltra was a failure, but it has interviews with people who describe the impact that they've had on them, and who, when they underwent this, and people just kind of forgot, not only like lost their kind of physical memories of events that had happened, but also that all of their emotional memories, so they wouldn't know how to act appropriately in social situations, and also it wouldn't make sense. Like life just became an enormously confusing and alien to them in every regard. It's really, it's incredibly tragic, but it's also, deeply disturbing. And again, it's
right.
like,
there's a huge case about them, and this whole case, and these people were destroyed, and some of the people have written books about it. So it's all very well documented. And a lot of those people went in for treatment unwittingly for emotional problems and came out vegetables after being cyclically driven, right?
Yeah, and it's just, it's really quite extraordinary. And I think that there were some court cases where people won substantial payouts and stuff. But I think that, again, it's the kind of the unwitting aspect of this is something that's deeply disturbing. CIA agents themselves and officers, we're getting spiked with LSD. There's poor Frank Olson, who was this army chemist who was effectively lured to a retreat by the CIA with a number of other kind of high-ranking officials who were involved in MKUltra, and he was spiked with LSD. He fell into this deep depression and then fell to his death some days later from I think the 16th story of a New York hotel. He told his wife that he was having serious moral reservations about what he was doing, and wanted to quit. So I mean, he may well have been murdered, of course. But the fact that the people were. Often it was people in prisons and psychiatric hospitals who were targeted. One article I should have out very soon is about the specific, the kind of racial component of MKUltra, which has never been looked at before. And it's some academics I spoke to have done some fantastic research into how the kind of the kind of practical aspects of various MKUltra experiments. And they found that like black inmates were consistently given far more LSD than white ones. They were dosed for far longer periods, days in a row and stuff. And it's just like a lot of the time these people were desperate. They were offered a reduction of their sentence, or they were usually addicted to drugs as it was. So they would be offered heroin and or a cut in how many years they were doing in order to get them to consent. There were also the CIA created a network of brothels in the US, and where the prostitutes would take their clients, and then they'd be filmed, and they'd be dosed with LSD and then watched from behind a two-way mirror. And the notion was, well, they're never going to say anything, are they? Because it would be too embarrassing publicly. So it's just it's just really the kind of extent of human cruelty is
the testing on unwitting people. I can't remember the name of that guy, but there's a good documentary about the guy who fell out the window.
Yeah, it's Frank
yeah.
Olson.
Frank Olson,
But
that's right.
yeah, but it's just
Errol Morris. Yeah, Errol Morris did it.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well that the you know, it would be. I've not actually done masses of research into this yet, and it's quite a sticky subject because it does attract some like loons, as it were. But I think that the idea that the CIA hasn't engaged in implanting people with technological devices against without their knowledge or consent, I mean, it's a very compelling one to me. And patents for this stuff quite clearly exist, and I think that's another thing that kind of speaks to more generally, though, is it's really extraordinary the amount of really quite shocking stuff which is fully publicized. It's not hidden, it's openly talked about. It's amazing to me that again, conspiracies can't happen, and yet we hear about.
We hear about them, right?
And
But,
they're very open about these, very, very open about a lot of the operations they engage in, and it's like often you can tell what kind of skullduggery they're up to by looking at what officials claim that the agency, or indeed say the military, is considering doing, and then it's like John Yoo, who is the Bush administration lawyer, who drew up the legal framework which justified the torture of CIA prisoners. In writing in 2005 for the LA Times, he very openly proposed that the US create fake terrorist groups to confuse their adversaries. And I would imagine that, this passed without comment at the time. I would imagine that was a kind of tacit acknowledgement that that's been happening already. Right. So I do think that actually some people can sometimes be quite amazed. I say modestly with the material that I'm capable of surfacing or unearthing. I mean, a lot of the time, actually, like, anyone could have found this stuff. It's just most people aren't looking or don't know where to look, and there's of course a conscious, deliberate effort to prevent people looking in the right direction.
No doubt. I mean, there's other people who've looked into it. John O'Neill wrote Chaos about Manson, and he looked at a lot of the Gottlieb West stuff and said they learned how to crack it, but the real challenge was making sure the public didn't know that they were able to crack people and get them to do certain stuff. And that was the similarity I think you point out actually in your article, is the drugging that's going on without people's consent, right?
Yeah, and it's just like that. I mean, that is an incredibly, sinister aspect of the. I mean, I'm capable of imagining what it must have. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't never know the full extent of it. I can't completely put myself in their shoes, but I can just imagine how horrific it would be to be subject to total sensory deprivation, and then forced to take a substance against my will without knowing what it was, and then if I refused, a huge team of very well built thugs burst into the room to hold me down and forcibly administer it. It's absolutely horrific. But the essential, most inmates were given some form of drugs. I think all of them from 2002 to 2005 were given this drug methylquine, which now this is an anti-malarial drug which is used. It was primarily used by the U.S. Army, and when the second they arrived, they were given a kind of it was a 1,250 milligrams, which is 5 times. A single dose is 250, and a single dose can cause permanent psychological scarring. But they were given 5 times that, despite the fact there was no risk of them contracting malaria. And it has since been withdrawn. The FDA has issued significant warnings about this. It's no longer prescribed to the US Army. It's been linked to suicides and murders amongst soldiers. So why they were doing this, apart from to break them down psychologically. And I think that there's been an enormous an enormously troubling silence over the fact that numerous Guantanamo inmates allegedly committed suicide or were potentially murdered. We still don't know we still don't know categorically which even today. But then if it was suicide, no doubt, like being pumped full of these these drugs, which in words of one inmate, he said it turned him into a zombie. I mean, surely this played some role. And I think that what's actually really extraordinary as well is that long before the torture report was published, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence actually visited Guantanamo, and it seems that they were very much aware that all of this stuff was happening, and they even praised the facility for being so clean. And it's just like so that I mean they were well aware of all of this stuff was happening, and they said nothing about it publicly, even though they were in a position to. And I mean, I just think it just speaks to not only a culture of impunity, but just the fact that that so often people within the power structure, for one reason or another, just reflexively cover things up. It's and I think it's going to be really interesting to learn in 10, 20, 30 years time what was actually happening within the CIA or in respect of, say, like ISIS or something. It would be entirely unsurprising. It would be entirely unsurprising to me, because these people operate on the assumption that no one's ever going to find out. I mean, to bring things back to the torture program, Abu Zubaydah was the CIA sort of specific a specific guarantee in writing that he would never ever be allowed out, and would never be in a position to tell the outside world what had happened to him. And then this was granted. And so, and then in that context, they can do, whatever they want, because, dead men tell no tales.
But they also have that like two-faced language, right? Like, this is not an enhanced technique to give them sensory deprivation, and we're giving them drugs. They're administered for mental health purposes, right? So, I mean, on the surface, it sounds like kind of warm and fuzzy, but I mean, if you're over drugging somebody for a long period of time,
I think that the language around this is really, really interesting, and it's just like when they say that there's a difference between enhanced and non-enhanced interrogation techniques, but then it's like forcing someone to stand against a wall and depriving them of sleep for 12 hours is considered non-enhanced. I mean, that is absolutely brutal. And I think that the numerous techniques that were used on the prisoners were kind of minted by the British. The Britain fought numerous kind of end of empire conflicts with nationalist movements in what remained of their empire after World War II, and along the way they practiced a wide variety of absolutely brutal torture techniques, which were kind of honed and refined over time. And this resulted in what they called the 5 techniques, which includes deprivation of sleep deprivation, food and drink deprivation, sensory deprivation, and stress positions, and etc. And these are all crucially things that don't leave marks, but are actually agonizing and awful. And shockingly, in the late 70s, a number of prisoners in Northern Ireland who've been subjected to this, they took a case to the European Court of Human Rights claiming that they'd been tortured, and the European Court of Human Rights, despite its name, ruled that what happened wasn't torture. And so this has been widely practiced and exported ever since. This is kind of total green light, and it's these are widely used around much of the world now. It's
incredible. It's very disturbing. And you quote this guy Jeffrey Kay, who says that it's the MKUltra program has spread to infect the entire U.S. military and CIA with impunity, like you said. Like, so it's. I mean,
Jeffrey Kay is fantastic. He's a pal of mine who's been extremely helpful. He's done some superb work on CIA torture, and also the history of biological warfare, which is another like really quite extraordinary, just really quite extraordinary episode. So, for instance, in the 1950s. Particularly during the war in Korea, the US was pursuing a number of biological warfare research programs, and then to this day it's denied that this was happening, even though primary source evidence is now available to suggest that it did.
Right. Yeah, they're lying about everything. They're lying about everything. And one of the fascinating things that there's a quote in there with Kay where he uses the phrase degradation, dependency, and dread. And I've been looking through the Jolly and West files at UCLA, his own files, and he has a file of the sub file. Title of it is degradation, dependency, and dread. So that's a known tactic of how to. Yeah. So that really, struck me when I was reading that. Like, okay, Jolly West is one of the CIA guys too. So, really, a remarkable article. And I mean, you even go back and talk about some of the Nazi programs, the stuff that the Japanese were doing at that camp, which I can't remember. So this stuff goes back even before MKUltra kind of did all of its research, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that this, the influence of the Nazis on CIA operations, it can't be underestimated. I mean, it's fairly well known, that under Operation Paperclip that the US imported a large number of Nazi scientists, to the country, but what's known is their significant contribution to the space race. Most of the other stuff isn't, and that has all Nazi techniques of propaganda were studied and copied, torture, like all manner of things.
So it goes all the way back in that, this is leading up to the present. So most people would think that the MKUltra techniques would have just gone away, just like the government said, but that's not true. They're still drugging and providing this stuff. So great article. Kit, where's the best place for, is there anything you'd like to add or anything I've missed before we wrap it up?
No, I think I'm all bases covered.
And where can people read your material? I mean, I have links to the Gray Zone, Mint Press, and is Twitter the best place to contact you? You can follow me on reach me on Twitter, or alternatively I do have my email is kitklarenberg at protonmail.com. Okay, so I'll put that in the show notes as well. If people want to reach out to you, click Klarenberg at protonmail.com. And again, the title of the article that we discussed today, which I recommend everybody go read, I'll put a link in the show notes, is Human Lab Rats, CIA Files Confirm Guantanamo Bay Torture Programs, MKUltra Roots. And the author is Kit Klarenberg. So, Kit, thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure. Take care, mate.
All right.
Bye-bye.